Okay, get this. It's actually kind of mind-blowing when you look at where our money really goes.
Oh, yeah.
Take lottery tickets. Americans spend more on lottery tickets each year than on movies, video games, music, sporting events. All of it combined.
Wow. Really? Combined.
Combined. And here's the kicker. It's often folks in lower income households buying the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows right away that our financial lives aren't always driven by, logic and spreadsheets. There's something deeper, our psychology.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating for you, the listener, right? It means how we act with money isn't just about financial literacy.
Right. It's emotional. It's behavioral.
Uh-huh. Understanding those forces can be incredibly insightful for your own life.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive is all about, the psychology of money. We've been looking into some really great research showing that, yeah, behavior often beats technical knowledge.
So our mission today is kind of unpacking these, let's call them soft skills of finance.
Perfect way to put it. We want to get into why we make the financial choices we do. Look at the stories, the examples, the stuff that isn't just math.
And the goal.
The goal is for you listening to get a fresh look at your own thinking and maybe understand others a bit better too.
Okay, so if it's not just about the numbers, what are these big influences? Where do we start?
Well, one of the biggest things that jumps out is just our own personal history, our experiences.
Right. Everyone's got a story.
Totally. Everyone you meet has a unique view on how money works, and it's almost entirely shaped by their life journey.
Makes sense. Like if you grew up with really high inflation.
Exactly. Your gut reaction to risk is going to be totally different from someone who only saw stable prices growing up,
Yeah.
or someone who went through a recession versus a boom time.
Yeah, those early experiences, the economic climate when you're young,
Yeah,
they basically install these core beliefs, don't they?
they really do. And they stick with you. There's this amazing story about a tech exec made a fortune in Wi-Fi, sold companies, super successful. You'd think he'd be cool, calm, collected about money, right?
You would think.
But apparently this guy carried around huge wads of $100 bills, like constantly showing it off, almost like he needed that external proof.
Huh. So massive financial success didn't equal peace of mind.
Not at all. It shows this disconnect, You can be brilliant financially, but still have a kind of wonky relationship with money itself.
Yeah, for you listening, it's a key point.
Yeah.
Just having the money or knowing the technical stuff doesn't guarantee you'll make sound judgments or feel secure.
And these differences based on experience can be huge. Think about JFK.
Okay.
When he was running for president, people asked about the Great Depression. He basically said, look, I don't really have firsthand memories. His family was super wealthy, actually did well then.
Right. He learned about it in books at Harvard.
Exactly. Now compare that to someone who actually lived through it, stood in breadlines. Their whole understanding of risk, security, totally different worlds.
That lack of direct experience,
Mm-hmm.
it really shapes your assumptions, your priorities.
Yeah.
It's hard to truly get the risk aversion if you haven't felt that kind of hardship yourself.
For sure. And it's not just massive historical things. Even smaller timeline differences matter. Like the book mentioned Bill Gross, the big bond guy.
Mm-hmm. The bond king.
For him, bonds were wealth generators. But his dad's generation, they lived through high inflation. To them, bonds might have felt like wealth incinerators.
Same asset, totally different feel based on when you lived.
Right. Or the stock market. If you were born around, say, 1970, you saw the S&P 500 go up like tenfold during your teens and 20s, even after inflation.
Wow. That's a powerful first impression of investing.
Totally positive. But someone born in maybe 1950, the market basically went nowhere during those same crucial years for them.
So they'd have a completely different baseline expectation. Much more cautious, probably.
Exactly. It's like we all have these financial operating systems installed early on, and sometimes the decisions make sense only through that specific OS.
Like the lottery tickets again?
Yeah, perfect example. Seems illogical for someone struggling to afford a $400 emergency to spend money on lottery tickets.
On the surface, yeah.
But maybe, from their perspective, their lived experience, their limited options, it feels like the only tiny shot, however improbable, at a major life change.
That's actually a really insightful way to frame it. It makes sense within their context, even if it looks irrational from the outside.
Exactly. And context is everything. Even something we take for granted now, like funding your own retirement. That's pretty new.
Oh, yeah, the whole 401k system.
The 401k only started in 1978. The Roth IRA. 1998.
It's really recent history.
So no wonder lots of us feel a bit lost navigating retirement savings. We're all kind of figuring out this relatively new landscape.
Like, that historical context is huge. This shift to individual responsibility for retirement. It's a massive change, and people are still adjusting.
Okay, so experiences shape us profoundly. But there's another really interesting, often underestimated factor: luck and risk.
Ah, yes. Luck versus skill. The eternal debate.
We love to think success is all hard work and talent, right? But the research suggests luck and risk play a much bigger role than we like to admit.
Oh, definitely. There's a real human bias there. We want to attribute things to skill, both our own successes and others. Admitting luck feels uncomfortable.
Think about Bill Gates. Obviously brilliant, driven, no question.
Sure.
But the odds of his specific situation, being one of just a handful of kids in the world with access to that specific computer at Lakeside School in the late 60s.
Right, the timing, the access.
That's not skill. That's incredible luck. How many other kids were just as smart, just as motivated, but didn't have that one specific crucial opportunity?
Yeah, the book poses that thought experiment. For every Bill Gates, there's maybe a Kent Evans, his friend, who was equally brilliant but died young, tragically, or just someone else who had the talent but not the timing.
It really makes you question how much of even huge success boils down to being in the right place, right time.
And it's not just us saying this. Even Nobel laureates wonder. Robert Shiller said he wanted to know the exact role of luck. It's hard to pin down. And because it's hard to measure, we tend to just ignore it, right? Calling someone else's success luck sounds like sour grapes. Calling our own success luck feels like false modesty.
So we default to the pure skill story, which is dangerous when we try to learn from success.
How so?
Well, we focus on the extreme outliers, the billionaires, the rock star CEOs. But those are the exact cases where extreme luck was probably most involved. Trying to copy their exact steps probably won't work for you.
Right. The more extreme the success, the less transferable the specific lessons might be, because luck played such a big part.
And it gets even trickier with historical figures like Vanderbilt or Rockefeller. Huge wealth, but they definitely bent, maybe broke some rules.
Yeah, there's that tendency to romanticize it as boldness or vision.
But it's also incredibly risky behavior. The line between bold and reckless is super thin, and you only really see it in hindsight. Did they get away with it? Luck played a part there, too, in avoiding the consequences.
That's a really important point for you listening. Don't just admire the success without looking at the risks taken, the ethics involved, and the role chance played in avoiding disaster.
Okay.
We definitely can't recommend breaking the law as a sound strategy.
No kidding. And the flip side is true, too. Failure can be a bad teacher if you don't account for risk.
Meaning?
Sometimes a decision looks terrible in hindsight, but it was actually just bad luck. A risk that was always there just happened to play out negatively. We shouldn't beat ourselves up for outcomes that were truly random or unavoidable.
Right, you need balance. Learn from mistakes, yes, but also recognize when plain old risk was the deciding factor, not necessarily a bad decision on your part.
Okay, so we've got experience, we've got luck and risk. Now let's get into something really core to our psychology: the desire for more.
The never-ending pursuit.
It seems fundamental, right? Wanting more money. But the research shows this constant chase can actually be pretty dangerous.
This is where we get into financial satisfaction.
Yeah.
And how the goalposts always seem to shift for us.
The story of Rajat Gupta is just, oh, wow. Here's a guy, peak of his career, on the board of Goldman Sachs, incredibly wealthy, great reputation.
Had it all, basically.
And he risks everything. Freedom, legacy for insider trading, for millions more he didn't even need. It makes you ask, when is enough actually enough?
Gupta's story is such a stark example of how that desire for more can just detach from any rational need, any actual increase in happiness. It becomes almost an addiction overriding everything else.
And the book nails it. The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving.
Right. As soon as we reach one level.
Our expectations rise, our perceived needs increase, so we're always chasing the next thing just to feel the same level of satisfaction, like running up a down escalator.
That hedonic adaptation concept is so key for you to grasp. Our happiness is relative to expectations. If expectations keep rising with income, you never actually feel richer.
And social comparison pours gasoline on that fire.
Oh, absolutely.
That rookie baseball player making $500 Ks a year, objectively rich, but compared to the superstar teammate making $30 million, He might feel underpaid, even kind of broke.
And the superstar looks at the billionaire team owner and feels less rich. It never ends if you keep looking up.
It's a cycle of feeling inadequate, always measuring yourself against someone else, even when you're doing incredibly well by any objective standard.
Which leads to a crucial point for everyone listening. Some things are just never worth risking for more money.
Like what?
Reputation.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Mm.
Your family, your close friends, your integrity.
Yeah. Gupta apparently said after prison he learned not to get too attached to anything, including his reputation. That really makes you stop and think about what truly matters.
It forces you to examine your own values. What are you really chasing? And what are you absolutely not willing to sacrifice to get it?
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about something less dramatic, maybe, but incredibly powerful: time and compounding.
Ah, the magic of compounding, often underestimated.
It's not flashy like hitting a meme stock, right?
Yeah,
But slow, steady growth over a long time, it can create extraordinary wealth for you.
yeah, it's where small, consistent things add up to huge results. The book uses that great analogy about ice ages.
Right, Milankovitch's theory. Tiny shifts in Earth's tilt over thousands of years cause massive climate change.
And Cuppen added that twist. It wasn't just the cold winters, but the cool summers that stopped the snow melting. Layer upon layer, year after year.
Snowball effect. Literally, little changes consistently applied over huge time spans lead to massive outcomes.
And you see that exact same principle with wealth. Warren Buffett is the classic example.
Obviously a brilliant investor.
Undeniably. But the real secret sauce to his billions isn't just hitting home runs every year. It's that he's been a consistently good investor for an incredibly long time, like 3/4 of a century. Started as a kid.
The numbers are staggering. If he'd started in his 30s and retired in his 60s, like most people,
His net worth would be maybe, what, $12 million? Something like that?
instead of 80-something billion, like 99.9% of his wealth came after age 50, built on that early base and just time. His skill is investing, but his superpower is time.
And it's not just the length of time, it's the uninterrupted compounding. Someone like Jim Simons at Renaissance Technologies, arguably higher average returns than Buffett,
Yeah, insane returns.
but over a shorter period, and maybe not starting quite as young with that base. If Simons had Buffett's time frame, the difference would be astronomical, orders of magnitude. It shows how even small return differences sustained over decades create unbelievable gaps for you.
And the crazy thing is, compounding isn't intuitive. Our brains aren't built for exponential growth.
Not really, we think linearly.
So we underestimate its power. We chase quick wins, the next big thing. We want the home run.
When the real secret for long-term success for you is often just getting pretty good, consistent returns for a really, really long time.
That impatience gets people in trouble. We hear about Jesse Livermore making a killing in the '29 crash.
But we forget the end of the story.
Right. He lost it all later. Overconfidence, leverage, risky bets. It's like a cautionary tale about sustainability versus short-term flash.
And it's not just individuals. Companies, too. Michael Moritz from Sequoia Capital said their success wasn't just picking winners, but their longevity surviving and adapting through market cycles for decades.
Buffett told that story about his friend Rick Guerin. Just as smart as him and Munger, apparently.
What?
But Rick was in a hurry to get rich, used a lot of leverage, market tanked in the '70s, margin calls. He got to sell his Berkshire stock back to Buffett for peanuts.
Ouch. Patience and avoiding that excessive risk that can knock you out of the game. It's crucial for letting compounding work for you.
Which brings us right to having a margin of safety. Having cash. Being able to ride out the storms.
Absolutely critical. That cash might not earn much, but its real value is preventing forced selling at the absolute worst time. That saves you from devastating losses.
The book called it having a barbelled personality.
Yeah, I like that. Explain it.
Be optimistic about the long-term future, the potential for growth.
But be paranoid about the short-term risks.
Exactly. Paranoid enough to have that cushion, that buffer, so you can survive the inevitable setbacks and stay invested for the long haul. It's balancing that optimism with real prudence.
Okay, let's tackle something that feels a bit weird, maybe. Accepting failure,
Yeah, we're taught failure is bad, right? Avoid it at all costs.
especially with money.
But the research suggests failure is actually normal, even necessary in some fields, like investing or starting a business.
And this is where that idea of long tails comes in, where a few things drive most of the results.
Brad Pitt had a great line accepting an award once. Something like, some projects work, some don't. No reason to dwell on either, just move on to the next.
That's pretty good. Captures that idea perfectly. just part of the process.
The book used the analogy of art dealers acting like index funds.
How so?
They buy lots of art, knowing most of it won't be worth much. But they're banking on finding those few huge winners, the Picassos, the Warhols, that make the whole portfolio work. They expect most pieces won't be blockbusters.
Right. It's a portfolio approach. Lots of misses are baked into the strategy.
Even Walt Disney. His first animation studio went bankrupt. Produced beloved cartoons, but the business failed initially. Talent doesn't guarantee success.
And look at venture capital. It's built on failure.
Totally. Most startups fail. VCs know this. They rely on that tiny percentage of unicorns to generate almost all the returns for the entire fund.
But it's not just VC. It happens in the public stock market, too. Most companies don't last forever. Many underperform.
Yeah, the book mentioned the Russell 3000 index. Even in that broad group of big companies, a huge chunk eventually go bust or get acquired cheaply, yet the index overall does well over time.
Because of the tail, those few massive winners like Amazon or Apple that drive a disproportionate amount of the total gains.
So what does this mean for you, the investor?
It means your behavior during those rare but intense periods of market craziness, the crashes, the panics, matters way more than what you do the rest of the time when things are calm.
Being able to just stay cool, stay invested when everyone else is freaking out. That's the key.
That's the investing genius right there. Not predicting the future, but controlling your own emotions during the storm.
So accepting that failure and underperformance are normal parts of the process lets you be more realistic about your own results. Even the masters are wrong a lot.
George Soros had that great quote. It's something like,
It's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
yeah, exactly. It's about the magnitude of wins versus losses, not just the frequency. Make sure your winners really win big and cut your losses reasonably quickly.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Let's move to something I found really profound. The real value of wealth.
Which isn't the fancy car or the big house.
Nope. According to the research, it's something much more fundamental. Control.
Control over your own life. Autonomy.
There was this psychologist, Angus Campbell, who studied happiness. He found that having a strong sense of controlling your own life was more dependable for happiness than basically anything else.
More than income level.
Yeah, and that's what money, at its best, buys you. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That's the highest dividend money pays.
It's about buying time and options for yourself. Even a little bit of wealth gives you the option to take a sick day without worrying about rent. A bit more lets you wait for the right job offer.
It's independence, autonomy.
I totally get this from personal experience. I did an internship in investment banking one summer.
Oh boy.
Great pay, looked good on the resume, but I had zero control over my time. It was one of the most miserable periods of my life. Every minute dictated by someone else.
Sounds brutal.
Dan Gilbert, founder of Quicken Loans, said something similar. His biggest jump in life satisfaction wasn't some huge payday. It was when he got control over his own schedule, back when he was like 22.
Just having that agency over your own life, that feeling is more valuable than the money itself, often.
And it's weird, right? The U.S. is the wealthiest country ever, but are people significantly happier than they were in the 1950s when they had much less stuff? The evidence is shaky at best.
We use the wealth to buy bigger houses, more things.
But often sacrifice control over our time to get them, especially with knowledge work, blurring the lines between work and life, always feeling on.
This brings up a key distinction for you listening. Being rich versus being wealthy.
Okay, what's the difference?
Rich is often about current income. High salary, lots of spending. Wealth is what you don't spend. It's the assets you've accumulated. Wealth is often invisible.
It's the car not bought, the fancy vacation skip.
Exactly. It's financial assets you haven't converted into visible stuff yet.
The Rihanna story illustrates this, right? Making millions, but nearly going bankrupt from spending.
Yeah, she sued her advisor. His defense was basically, look, if you spend all your money on things, you end up with things not wealth. Blunt, but true.
So building wealth, increasing your savings rate, it's less about earning more and more about managing the gap between your ego and your income.
That's what the book argues. It takes humility, resisting the urge to spend every dollar you make just because you can.
And the return on that saved wealth isn't just financial. It's that unseen return. Flexibility, control, options.
And in today's world where things change so fast, having control over your time and options, that's becoming incredibly valuable for you. More valuable than ever.
It lets you step back, think differently, Move at your own pace. Pursue what actually matters to you, not just what pays the bills right now.
Okay, so control is huge.
Yeah.
Now let's get into a subtle but important difference. Being reasonable versus being strictly rational with money. Yeah,
This isn't about being illogical, but acknowledging we're human, not robots.
right. Academic finance loves mathematically optimal strategies. Maximize every penny.
But real people,
Uh-huh.
we want strategies we can actually stick with, strategies that let us sleep at night, even if they aren't technically perfect on paper.
Totally. The book uses the example of using leverage in your retirement account. Mathematically, maybe it boosts long-term returns.
But emotionally, watching your nest egg get crushed in a downturn because of leverage, that's not reasonable for most people. You'd panic and sell at the bottom.
Exactly. You'd abandon the rational strategy because it felt unreasonable emotionally.
The book even suggests that maybe loving your investments, feeling a connection, that might be reasonable, even if not purely rational by numbers alone.
How so?
Because if you believe in what you own, you're more likely to hold on through thick and thin. You'll weather the volatility better.
That makes sense. And what about forecasts? We know economic and market forecasts are usually wrong.
Terribly wrong, often.
But making them, reading them,
Right.
it still feels reasonable, doesn't it? We want to feel like we have some handle on the future, even if it's an illusion.
It's that human need for perceived control again.
And history. It's a guide, but not a perfect map, right? Especially now.
Because the financial world changes. The rise of 401ks, the scale of venture capital. These are new dynamics. History from 50 years ago might not fully apply to your situation today.
Daniel Kahneman said the key lesson from surprises isn't, I'll never make that mistake again. It's
realizing the world is just really hard to predict. Embracing that uncertainty is more reasonable than pretending you have all the answers.
which leads perfectly to the next point. Room for error. Margin of safety.
Absolutely essential. Because the world is unpredictable, you need buffers.
The analogy of a blackjack card counter is good here, even when they know the odds are in their favor.
They never bet everything on one hand. Never.
Why not?
Because they could be wrong. A weird shuffle, a miscalculation, just bad luck. They need reserves to keep playing the long game. Survival first.
That's Benjamin Graham's margin of safety right there. Widen the gap between what you hope will happen and what could realistically go wrong. Build in a cushion.
And remember, the really big investment gains, they often come infrequently. You need to endure the lean times to be around for the fat times. Room for error lets you endure.
Even Bill Gates, back in the early Microsoft days, was conservative. Always wanted enough cash to cover a year's payroll, no matter what. Survival is paramount.
And it's not just financial room for error, it's emotional room too.
Meaning?
Big market drops are psychologically brutal. Having a buffer, knowing you don't have to sell, knowing you can weather it, prevents panic decisions driven by fear.
And leverage. It just destroys that room for error, doesn't it?
Completely. It turns normal, manageable risk into potentially catastrophic risk for you. A 20% market drop might be unpleasant normally, but with leverage, it could wipe you out entirely.
The book had that weird story about German tanks in WWII.
Oh yeah, the mice. Super advanced tanks, supposedly invincible. Disabled because mice crawled in and chewed the wiring insulation.
A completely unforeseen, tiny risk that had huge consequences.
It just shows you can't predict everything. You have no idea what future needs or emergencies might pop up. That room for error is your buffer against the unknowable unknowns. Planning for the plan not to go according to plan is the most important part of the plan.
Okay, now for a real psychological twist.
Yeah.
We're not great at predicting our future selves.
The end of history illusion.
Exactly. We tend to think the person we are now, our goals, tastes, values, is the final version. That we won't change much more.
But we do, constantly.
There's that story in the book about the friend who worked incredibly hard for years to become a doctor.
Achieve the dream.
And then realized he hated it. The reality wasn't what his younger self envisioned. The person who set the goal was different from the person who achieved it.
Think about your childhood dreams, what you wanted to be when you grew up, or who you dated back then versus now. We change. Our priorities shift. Circumstances change.
So this end of history illusion means we make long-term plans based on our current selves, assuming future us will want the same things.
Which can lead to problems. Buffett's consistency works partly because so many people change and abandon their long-term plans midway.
So the advice is, plan with flexibility. Don't lock yourself into extreme paths that your future self might regret.
Precisely. Avoid the extremes. Build in options. And recognize sunk costs.
Meaning?
Don't keep pouring time or money into something just because you already invested a lot, especially if it no longer fits who you are now. Be willing to cut losses on past decisions made by a previous version of yourself.
Okay, let's talk about the price of investing. Not just fees, but the other costs.
Right, the emotional toll.
Every investment has a price. It includes volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, regret. That's part of the deal.
The GE story is a sobering reminder here. Seemed invincible for decades, right? Blue chip staple.
Totally. Then disaster. Investors who thought they were buying stability paid a heavy price when things went south unexpectedly.
So trying to get the returns without paying the price. Trying to time the market perfectly, avoid all volatility, find risk-free high returns.
It's like trying to steal, the book says. It rarely works out long-term for you.
And the irony. Data from Morningstar shows investors who try hardest to avoid volatility by jumping in and out often underperform those who just accept it as part of the ride.
They mistime things, buy high, sell low.
Exactly. So, a healthier mindset for you is to view volatility not as a fine or a punishment, but as a fee. It's the price of admission for the potential of good long-term returns. Like paying for a ticket to Disneyland, you pay the fee for the chance to have fun.
Okay, shifting slightly. Why are we sometimes willing to believe almost anything when it comes to money? The power of narrative.
Yeah, stories are powerful.
Yeah.
And in finance, they can be incredibly persuasive, sometimes dangerously so.
A key idea here is that we often take cues from people playing a totally different game than us.
Different goals, different time horizons.
Right. What looks like a crazy price for a stock to a long-term value investor might make perfect sense to a short-term trader just riding momentum.
There's no single rational price for an asset. It depends entirely on your game, your time frame, your goals.
The dot-com bubble is the classic example, isn't it?
Perfect example. Valuations looked insane to traditional investors. But for short-term traders just chasing the upward trend, it was rational for them for a while.
The danger comes when the long-term players get sucked into the short-term games mentality without realizing it.
Exactly. Bubbles cause damage when people forget why they invested in the first place and start chasing quick profits based on narrative, not fundamentals relevant to their own goals. Define your game and stick to it.
Okay, finally, let's talk about pessimism. Why does bad news seem so much more compelling than good news in finance?
It's the seduction of pessimism. It just grabs our attention more easily.
Why, though?
Psychologically, bad news signals danger. Loss aversion kicks in. Financially, bad news often feels more urgent and impacts more people simultaneously than gradual good news. A crash affects everyone. Slow growth is less dramatic.
Matt Ridley and Hans Rosling both talked about this, right? How pessimism is so persuasive despite overwhelming long-term progress.
Yeah. And financial pessimism is particularly potent because money is universal, downturns hit hard, and bad events demand explanations and narratives about future fears.
Pessimists also often just extrapolate current negative trends forever.
Without accounting for adaptation, innovation, people solving problems. Think of all the peak oil predictions over the decades. Then came fracking. Markets adapt.
Progress is often slow, steady, almost invisible day to day. Setbacks are fast, dramatic, attention-grabbing. A 40% drop gets headlines. A 140% gain over several years might not.
That sting of pessimism is just more immediate, more powerful emotionally for you than the slow, steady pull of optimism.
The book had that great alien economist thought experiment after 2008.
Right. The alien arrives, sees the factories, the knowledge, the people, all still there. He couldn't understand why everyone felt so much poorer.
Because the story had changed, the narrative became deeply pessimistic, even if the underlying capacity for wealth creation hadn't vanished.
It shows how much the stories we tell ourselves impact our behavior and outcomes. Narratives matter. A lot.
Wow. Okay, so pulling all this together, what are the big confessions or takeaways about money psychology from this deep dive?
Well, a huge one for you is realizing we're all wired to believe stories that fit what we want to be true, especially when money's involved.
And we all have incomplete views of the world, but we create complete narratives anyway to fill the gaps. That leads to misunderstanding in markets.
Recognizing how much is outside our control is vital too. Resist that urge to think you can dictate outcomes.
Like medicine shifting to patient-centered care, personal finance has no single right answer. It depends entirely on your goals, your values, your circumstances.
So core principles for you to remember. Aim to be reasonable, not coldly rational. Understand volatility as the price of returns, not a fine. Build in room for error for endurance. Avoid extremes because your future self will change. Define your own game. and respect that finance is messy and unpredictable.
The author shared his own philosophy focused on independence and sleeping well at night, even if it meant irrationally paying off a low-interest mortgage. It's personal.
Which brings us back to the start. No one is crazy. Our financial decisions usually make sense based on our unique experiences and goals. Understanding that is the first step towards empathy and better financial understanding for yourself.
So as we wrap up, I'd encourage you listening, take a moment. Think about how your own history, your beliefs, shape your money decisions. Are you playing the right game for your goals?
Yeah, maybe chew on this. How can understanding these soft skills, this psychology, lead you to more peace of mind, better long-term well-being? Maybe even more so than just chasing the absolute highest return. It's about aligning your money with your life.